Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And this week we bid a big farewell to one of the major characters in the extended royal universe.
Well, not this week. At the end of the year, we'll be saying farewell. But we are starting today with a royal staffing update.
Yeah. So on Wednesday, the palace released a statement announcing the departure of none other than Jason Nauf, who is the chief executive of the Cambridge's Royal Foundation, and he's been working for them for 7 years.
He first started working for Will and Kate in February 2015 as communications secretary at Kensington Palace. And he moved around a little bit before ending up as chief executive at the Royal Foundation. He's going to remain in that role until the end of 2021 before what we're told is a planned international relocation that has necessitated his decision to stand down.
Which is quite a grand way of saying that his partner's got a new job.
Yes, overseas. The statement did say that the process for recruiting a new chief executive will begin in the coming weeks and Jason's successor will be announced in due course.
The Cambridges sang his praises. They said, "We are immensely grateful for his hard work and commitment, both at the Royal Foundation and previously as our communications secretary. Since taking over as chief executive, Jason has driven positive change, making our vision for our charitable work and the causes that matter most to us a reality." I was quite interested in this positive change because it seems quite mixed to me. It seems he helped deliver both the Earthshot Prize, which he's still going to be around to help hand out later this year.
He's not going to miss out on that one.
But he also seemingly orchestrated the campaign against Meghan in the run-up to the Oprah interview, the one that was accusing her of being a bully.
Yeah, it was him that filed the complaint to HR in 2018, the one that formed the basis of that big story that came out just before the Oprah interview.
So I guess you could say both of these things are very positive for the Cambridges, but I don't know if they are net positive in what they add to the world in the same way, you know?
Jason now made a statement as well. He said, "Working with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge has been the privilege of my career. I will always be grateful for the opportunity I've had to support their leadership in the UK and internationally."
He's got one thing on his mind.
He wants to be on that honours list.
Yeah! It is pretty notable as well, I thought, and this was pointed out in a piece on Celibacy, that the Palace Crisis Managers started a couple of weeks ago, and Jason's exit appears to be one of the first moves they've made.
Yeah, I also think it was really weird to announce this so far in advance of him leaving. You know, he's not stepping out until the end of the year. So I guess, you know, I saw royal fans saying this was an admirable show of the palace embracing more transparency in their communications and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we needed to know like 7 months in advance.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like standard practice, I wouldn't have thought. So I feel like they must be trying to send some other kind of message. But it was definitely a message that wasn't picked up in the way we might have expected by the press.
Yeah, and, you know, it's probably worth mentioning that every time there was any kind of staff shake-up with Harry and Meghan, it made a big splash. It was often on the front pages over here. And I couldn't see any front page coverage of this news, which is pretty significant, I think, given what a big role he has had and how long he's worked with Will and Kate for.
And especially how much he's been in the press in the last few months with all the stuff running up to the Oprah interview.
Yeah, definitely. And on top of that, the coverage that I did see was sort of trotting out those excuses of how royal staff are often paid notoriously low wages and, you know, things that we've said when we talked about Prince Harry and Meghan, but those kind of explanations don't seem to register for people when it's Sussex staff changes.
Oh yeah, but when it's the Cambridges, it's all suddenly very understandable and there's lots of very valid reasons why you would leave.
I was really interested in this piece in the Daily Mail by Dan Wootton, which suggested that Prince Charles may have had a role in all of this unfolding.
Yes, this piece had a royal insider speaking, who said, Prince Charles and senior courtiers are very aware of the bitterness between Harry and Meghan and many of the senior staff who were in post during their time in the family after their wedding. Jason was particularly a lightning rod because he was also the communications secretary to Harry and Meghan, but then wrote the infamous letter accusing her of bullying staff that was leaked to the Times newspaper in the days before the Oprah interview. It was impossible to imagine any sort of rapprochement while he remained in a senior role at Will and Kate's Foundation and one of their key advisors.
Yeah, and they had another source talking about how things turned very sour between the Sussexes, and now once their operations were split with the Cambridges, they felt they could no longer trust him. The hope is that bridges will also be easier to rebuild between William and Harry next year with a new team in place. That's what Charles wants them to do. He would like there to be more pleasant atmosphere at family events in the medium term. But once Charles is king in an ideal world, he would like to think there is a role for Harry. We've talked about this before. But I think this story coming out in the Mail with someone like Dan Wootton, who has gotten a lot of exclusives from the firm, seemed striking to me as a way of putting out this new narrative, suggesting that Charles may have been pulling the strings in this situation.
That's a very interesting. I would kind of like to think that Charles would do something like this. Is this like his trying to reach out to Harry across the vast ocean that splits them?
And as well, the Sunday Times had a story today about how Charles is planning to open up the palaces when he becomes king. And, you know, talking about things like this, it's very much illustrative of Charles's sort of soft regency, something that has been sort of quietly discussed for the last few years, but now, as he's sort of calling himself the new patriarch of the royal family since Prince Philip's death, it seems ever more notable, I think.
That Dan Wootton piece also noted that there's been a full change of the guard in all senior communications posts from the height of the media battle between the Sussexes and the rest of the royals, because Charles and William's communications secretaries, Julian Payne and Christian Jones, have both left as well.
Yeah, and, you know, we often hear from royal watchers who blame the staff for a lot of the problems in the royal family, whether it's courtiers blocking access to the Queen or leaking to the press, and there's often calls for them to be replaced. You know, even we say, like, they need to tighten their ship.
And even Harry has said things like this,
yes.
like in the Oprah interview.
So it will be interesting to see whether this makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think now that you've had such a big turnover of staff, you'll kind of maybe start to see if some of these orders are still coming from within the house. You know, if you get the same behaviour happening again, maybe it's not entirely the staff to blame.
Yeah, exactly. On Tuesday, the Queen was out. She addressed Parliament, delivering what is known as the Queen's Speech, but which we have discussed before, is prepared for her by the Prime Minister's office and sets out the government's plan for the year.
So it doesn't really represent the Queen's personal thoughts in any way, but one point has really captured the imagination of royal watchers in particular, and that's this element of the speech. My government will strengthen and renew democracy and the Constitution. Legislation will be introduced to ensure the integrity of elections, protect freedom of speech, and restore the balance of power between the executive, legislature, and the courts. And what this is an electoral integrity bill which will make it mandatory for voters to show photo ID in future elections. They'll also remove the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which will allow governments to choose the date of election without a vote in the House of Commons.
Yeah, and The Guardian kind of summarised this quite neatly when they said, according to civil rights groups both in the UK and US, mandatory voter ID where there's no evidence of significant voter impersonation is little more than electoral suppression, disproportionately affecting younger and more vulnerable voters who are less likely to be conservatives. The government rejects this, saying the plan is needed to give voters faith in the integrity of elections.
I think it's worth saying, like, we don't have a problem with voter fraud.
At all.
And actually, I think I was reading something that said the only place that there could be voter fraud really is in the postal vote situation, which isn't going to change.
Yes.
So the only reason for bringing this in, and this is the main reason it's got so much attention, I think, is because it's not only a fucking terrible idea, but it's only being done to ensure that the Conservatives stay in power.
Yeah, and they don't even really need it
Yeah.
You know, as far as I can tell, Boris Johnson is very secure in his position, and it feels more like rubbing salt in the wound.
Yeah, it's like a weird and horrible and scary move by the government, I think. But I was wondering about the kind of particular scrutiny that was coming from the royal watching community, and maybe it's because so much of that community is American, and you guys in America have seen the damage that this kind of ruling does. And also, like, as we've seen over the last year with the last election, it's so hard to come back from that.
Yeah. And Meghan Markle has spoken about this. She was very vocal ahead of the US presidential election on the importance of voting and combating forms of voter suppression and things like that.
So it's a hot topic within royal circles. But like we said, the Queen doesn't really get a say on that, so it's a bit of a reach to say that the Queen...
It's definitely a reach.
Yeah, you can't say the Queen is in favour of voter suppression because she read out this speech, although it's maybe not a totally wild speculation.
Yeah, but like she's not going to say, I'm not reading that.
Yeah.
She has, I'm pretty sure, never refused to read out any aspect of a Queen's speech.
No. But something that we could maybe be a little more secure in thinking she is in favour of was another line from the Queen's speech which said, "My ministers will promote the strength and integrity of the Union."
Yes, because recently, last weekend, Nicola Sturgeon was re-elected as Scotland's First Minister, and there have been renewed discussions about a second referendum on Scottish independence. Nicola Sturgeon has said it's a priority once the pandemic is over, although there has been speculation about whether Downing Street would take the Scottish government to court to prevent this referendum.
I think that Boris just does not want to be the Prime Minister in charge when Scotland gets its independence. But undoubtedly the biggest royal story from this week was Harry appearing on Dax Shepard's podcast, Armchair Expert.
Yeah, this came as a surprise. You know, he's got his own fucking podcast and we haven't heard any update from that since last year.
Another classic 2020 one episode podcast. But does that mean you'd say that you were blindsided by this?
I mean, look, I'll be honest, I have no interest in listening to Dax Shepard's podcast, never listened to it before. I'm pretty confident I will never listen to it again.
It's when he said "rad dude" like twice, and I was like, no, I will listen to this for 90 minutes and I will never come back.
I don't have a problem with rad dude, but a 90-minute podcast with him just does not appeal to me. And I have to admit, it was a struggle to get through this.
Yeah.
I felt like I was doing homework. I don't like when our podcast, when Airheads feels like homework.
Yeah.
But guys, we listen to it so you don't have to.
They started off by discussing Joe Rogan's comments that young, healthy people shouldn't get vaccinated. And Harry said, "You've got to be careful about what comes out of your mouth," and added, "With a platform comes responsibility," and suggested that Joe Rogan just stay out of it.
Yeah, Joe Rogan, in case you don't know, is a very provocative podcaster.
Like us.
He's also a Spotify podcaster, though, so he's one of Harry's colleagues. But I guess he's sort of a minor celebrity. What stood out to me about this was, Harry following this kind of news about a minor celebrity like Joe Rogan and engaging in this kind of discussion, which I think you could describe as shit talking bitching about someone, which typically, royals would never do because they have to be super diplomatic and neutral on all of this kind of stuff. So I thought that was a sort of new thing that we hadn't seen Harry do.
Yeah, and I mean...
Oh, and he's totally right, obviously.
Yeah, of course. I was going to say, it's very on brand as well for them with their vaccine advocacy work that they've been doing recently, that they would want to make sure everyone gets vaccinated, which you should.
Yes. We're not Joe Rogan fans.
They also discussed the pictures of Harry naked in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I thought that was quite a good icebreaker, even if Dax Shepard is pretty annoying.
Yeah. But they covered a whole load of things. The main kind of focus of the podcast was talking about mental health.
Yeah, because it is Mental Health Awareness Week, and Harry's long-awaited mental health docuseries with Oprah is finally arriving next week, so he was sort of doing it to promote that. But they talked a lot about Harry's own personal experience, and he sort of grilled Dax Shepard a little bit and asked him a lot of questions about his own background.
Yeah, he kind of went into therapist mode. There was a bit where he was like, so you were chasing something?
And Harry talked about the importance of recognizing that speaking out is a sign of strength. It's not just complaining if you have the chance to help someone else with their problems.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because it's something in particular that Will claims to want to do, destigmatizing talking about your mental health. And Will, I feel, constantly undermines any of his own kind of efforts on this behalf, because he will do things like call Harry fragile.
Yeah,
or
mentioned that a few times.
Just his very underwhelming kind of revelations about his own mental health. Oh, I felt a bit sad and kind of stuff like that. Whereas I felt Harry gave quite a lot of specific personal insights into like moments of his life and how he was feeling. And like in particular, he talked about his struggles as a child or as a young man and how his family reacted to that. He said, "I was told you need help as a case of not weakness, but I don't know how to deal with this. You're unhinged. You're not very well. Go and seek help." And Harry said that it caused him to object and run away, and said, "Every one of us will try to find some way to mask the actual feeling and try to feel different from how we actually feel." And I felt this was a very good insight into not just how the royal family operates as a kind of toxic, like repression heavy family, but like a lot of people in Britain who kind of don't like to talk about feelings or expose themselves and would rather like send someone away or tell them to just go deal with it on their own.
Yeah, and it sort of echoes a lot of the things that we've heard from palace sources or sources in the Cambridge camp saying that Harry needs help or that he's not very well, he's fragile, those kind of things. And he's sort of speaking to how difficult that can be to hear those things about yourself when you're struggling.
And especially as that is the one time where you can't really hear those things, like you're most likely to just run away from that kind of conversation.
He also talked about how Meghan was the impetus for him seeking therapy, and that she had recognised the anger he had and what he needed to do. And then Dax Shepard was like, "Oh, well, you got red hair, so you've got a really bad temper." And he was like, "No, I don't have a bad temper. I've never shouted or screamed." What the fuck?
Yeah, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I assume...
Bullshit.
I assume that he means something like his anger doesn't always manifest in terms of screaming at people, maybe.
I've never screamed or shouted.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lie, obviously. that can't possibly be true.
And I think a lot of people as well were doing timeline forensics, being like, well, I thought he did therapy before he met Meghan, and didn't he do therapy after his mother died, and blah, blah, blah. But, he's spoken about how he thought all his problems were sorted.
Yeah.
And then he had to go back because things got difficult. I don't think there's really any value in getting into the nitty gritty of all that.
Especially as there's a difference between going to therapy and doing therapy, Not to get too deep.
It was this therapy that made Harry realise he needed to take action to change his life, having seen behind the curtain of royal life. He'd always known he didn't want it, but at this point he realised he didn't have to just accept it. And he talked a little bit about how he, what he said before, that he wanted to leave the royal family long before Meghan came along.
Yeah.
He said in his early 20s, I was a case of, I don't want to do this job, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this, look what it did to my mum, how am I ever going to settle down, have a wife and family when I know it's going to happen again? I think he's probably going to keep repeating this to sort of combat that Megxit narrative, but, it is worth pointing out.
Yeah, definitely.
People do need to hear it. I also enjoyed his little anecdote about one of his first dates with Meghan.
Oh, yeah. So he said, the first time that Meghan and I met up for her to come and stay with me... honk, honk. We met up in a supermarket in London, pretending we didn't know each other. So we were texting each other from the other side of the aisles. It's pretty good role play, right?
This was definitely the Whole Foods.
Yeah, in High Street Kensington.
Yeah.
Definitely.
He's like saying a supermarket as if it was like a Tesco or an Aldi or something.
And it wasn't like looking at sort of artisanal seeded sourdough breads. But I did get the impression from the way he talked about mental health that he clearly thinks about this kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah.
Talks about it a lot, presumably listens to a lot of people talking about it. Like we said, he kind of slipped into a real therapist mode at one point, and he did get a bit cliched and jargony at times, but, you know, he does live in California now, and I'm looking at this from the lens of, like, the super repressed country that invented the stiff upper lip. So I kind of see where I would get that kind of impression from.
Yeah, and I'm like sort of reluctant to fully endorse this conversation because, you know, I have heard in general a discussion about when the royals talk about mental health. I've heard, you know, mental health professionals can find it to be quite a sanitized conversation, and that the royals, and I guess celebrities in general, prefer to sort of avoid getting their hands dirty and talking about this kind of stuff and focus on the sort of clean side in terms of talk about how you feel and share your feelings and things like that, rather than calling for more support and better services for people who are struggling.
Yeah.
So I would be interested to hear from somebody who actually knows what the fuck they're talking about, unlike you and me, about how they interpreted this interview that Harry did.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the fact that Harry has kind of put his support behind a for-profit mental health startup company in Silicon Valley kind of shows that, you know, he's living in America now. There's a very different relationship to health services. And royals over here, you know, the government funds the NHS over here. So, you know, it's the government you have to appeal to try and get more funding for better initiatives and support for mental health services. I don't think it works quite the same way in America. I don't know very much about the healthcare system over there, but I'm not quite sure where Harry's demands would be focused in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Maybe he feels that by trying to raise the profile of a for-profit mental health support service, that's the best way he can advocate for better services.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get a better insight into this in the Apple TV series.
Yeah.
Or I'm hoping we will anyway. He also talked about privilege, racism, and unconscious bias. Again, things he has spoken about before and which he seems pretty comfortable talking about at this point. Although I felt like the hosts were sort of patting him on the back a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, what was really clear from this for me was that, like, while we might find quite a lot of what Harry says very mild when it comes to talking about racism, his target audience is squarely people who need to be handheld into anti-racism, white people who need to be handheld into anti-racism. And I do think he's becoming quite good at that. In particular, the discussion they had about unconscious bias and how it's different from, but can still support racism. It felt like a reassuring way of delivering that message, basically saying, like, unconscious bias doesn't mean you're racist. It's just if you don't do anything about it, then you're helping racists. It's like a kind of gentle way of telling people to, like, get their shit together. And hopefully packaging it like this will help it get to the people who need to hear it most. I was pretty confused, though, when Harry was talking about being able to move up and down the spectrum of privilege.
Yeah.
It just seemed pretty naive to me, because he's a very famous, very rich white man. He'll never need to worry about money. He can't really move down the spectrum of privilege.
Yeah, and the host kind of made a joke about how Harry and Oprah had switched places on this spectrum of privilege.
Really ignoring the issue here, which is that Oprah has worked incredibly hard to get to where she is, whereas Harry was literally dropped at the end of the spectrum that he still occupies, you know?
Yeah, and the kind of language they were using throughout the episode about how, you know, he didn't have any choice in what he was born into. but he still enjoys all the benefits and the privileges that come with that position.
Yeah, much as the hosts and Harry wanted to really focus on the negative aspects of his privileged position.
Yeah, I was interested in his description of royal life when he said it's a mix of being in the Truman Show and being in the zoo. Which seems to me like an indication that he may be moving ever closer to anti-monarchism.
Which is the end result that we are looking for.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. He also talked, as you would expect, about press interest and intrusion into his life. It was another kind of major part of the podcast, but I don't think we really need to go into it because he didn't say anything new on the subject, and we've talked about Harry talking about this a few times now.
So many times.
Yeah. We should go on to the part of the interview which gives us our quote of the week.
Yeah, I felt like the sort of fresh element of this podcast was his discussion about parenting, which garnered the most headlines as well when he talked about how he would learn from Charles and the Queen's mistakes.
Yeah. So he said, if I've experienced some form of pain or suffering because of the pain or suffering that perhaps my father or my parents had suffered, I'm going to make sure that I break that cycle so that I don't pass it on. Suddenly I started to piece it all together and go, okay, so this is where he went to school. This is what happened. I know this bit about his life. I also know that's connected to his parents. So that means he's treating me the way that he was treated, which means how can I change that for my own kids?
Yeah, this was the sort of highlight for me, and it was the big takeaway, as I was saying, in the press. It was on almost all the front pages. Yeah. The Sun described it as Harry's bitter swipe at Charles, and the Mail asked just how low can Harry go, which some people pointed out was particularly out of sync during Mental Health Awareness Week, given they devoted, I think, like 5 pages to coverage of Harry's interview, criticising him.
And at the same time, there's been royal watchers saying that the papers are taking this quote totally out of context, and they kind of point at the if at the beginning of the quote, saying that this makes it all totally hypothetical and Harry's not really having a go at anyone in his family.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think what he says is hypothetical. He's talking about the specifics of Charles being sent by his parents to a particularly brutal boarding school that he hated. And when he's asked if he plans on parenting differently to how his father did, he straight away says yes.
Yeah, so it's definitely very specific. And at the same time, by being specific like this, Harry is actually trying to show that no one is entirely to blame for their parenting mistakes. He says at one point, there's no blame. And his point is that it takes a lot of effort to try and understand what went wrong and how to change it. So it's kind of between what the press are saying and what some royal watchers are saying, I think.
Yeah, and Prince Charles has spoken about this before, about his difficulties with his parents growing up, his sort of emotional difficulties in childhood. You know, it's not something that is unprecedented in the royals. The future king has, you know, possibly taken a bitter swipe at the Queen himself, if that's how you're looking at it. So, you know, it is being blown out of proportion, I think. But it's also implied that it's only by managing to get out of the royal machinery that Harry is even able to consider doing things differently.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that while Harry is mainly talking about his own circumstances, this is a situation that I guess anyone can find themselves in, that you need to get a new perspective to try to understand your relationship with your parents and why they behave the way that they have done and how you can either do things the same or differently to them. So I think it's kind of an example of what Harry was talking about earlier when he was talking about mental health, and his point that if you share your own particular experience and speak out, some of what you say will resonate more broadly. So, you know, by telling this story, I think there is something like wider to be garnered from it.
Yeah.
But the way the press spun it was, I think, unfortunately inevitable.
Yeah, and I think it sort of comes down, as most things about Harry and Meghan do, to how people feel about Harry and Meghan already. You know, people have made up their minds about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, you know, the tabloids love to talk about how awful it was for Will and Harry to be made to walk behind their mother's coffin. But then once Harry actually hints that the way the royal family works might lead to bad parenting decisions, they treat him like he's committed an act of war.
And, you know, like I said, Prince Charles has spoken about this before, and people also love The Crown, which went to great detail to show the Queen's emotional detachment from her children and her pretty lackluster parenting.
Yeah.
And people were all over that too. So it just seems really unfair that Harry can't allude to that without being attacked.
Yeah. But like we said, we're not super into very long, very earnest discussions. So here are some of our personal favourite moments.
Well, mine was obviously Harry saying shit
3 times.
3 times. The first time, I said, Tom. He said shit. And then we started keeping count after that point. But I could tell because we have a lot of 1-star reviews from people who get very upset when we swear. So I could tell people were going to have issues with this, and they certainly did.
Yeah.
Also loved Harry name-dropping his buddy Orlando Bloom, who lives up the road from him, apparently, with Katy Perry.
And who's going to be voicing him in Gary Janetti's upcoming animated series about the young Prince George.
I wonder if that's going to go ahead. I have a
So
feeling
weird.
something is going to happen with that.
Yeah.
Because I just can't imagine Harry, like, being on a group chat with Orlando Bloom and whatever other celebrities live nearby, but with somebody who's about to play him in a TV show.
Yeah, it seems wild.
Especially one that is going to be so critical of the royal family.
Yeah. I really liked Harry revealing that their rescue chickens arrived butt naked, but that they're now covered with feathers.
Yeah, people were very into the update on Archie's
Chicken.
Yes. Harry admitting that he hasn't read Oprah's book was a what the fuck moment to me.
So funny.
When Dax Shepard was like, I presume you've read it because you're obviously doing a show with her. And he said, no, I haven't read it yet.
And then Dax Shepard was like, you know there's an audiobook.
Harry, your fucking show is coming out in less than a week, man.
Oh my god. Do you think Oprah knows that he hasn't read the book?
Well, she knows now.
We did also get Harry hammering home the point that service is universal.
Yeah, I think there were a few moments where it seemed like he was responding to his critics. I think when he talked as well about how it's not complaining, and that when he visited the Commonwealth that he realised that people all have their own problems. It seemed to be a sort of riposte to people who had criticised him and Meghan for speaking about their struggles during the South Africa tour on the ITV documentary.
Yeah, felt that.
Palace sources, however, expressed their disappointment that Harry's interview came out the same day that Prince William and Kate were carrying out an engagement.
Oh my god, they still want to try and coordinate diaries. It's so
It's
sad.
not happening, guys. We should mention that in the sort of debrief of Dax Shepard's podcast, they talked about how they purposefully decided to release it later than usual so that it would arrive when the UK was asleep, so that the sort of American media would cover it before the UK press did.
Smart.
I don't know if it's smart, but it seems like a way of sort of protecting Harry and Meghan.
But Will and Kate were out this week for Mental Health Awareness Week, doing a whole string of events, and it's from one of these that we get our Fit for a Queen.
Yes, before we get into that though, I will quote the royal source who told the Times, "It was such a lovely day for the Cambridges. It's a shame that it got usurped by what Harry had to say. Nobody's shocked anymore. It's more, here we go again. But he should be told that these grievances should be aired in the privacy of your own home. Don't do it publicly in a podcast. Get on with your life."
I felt personally attacked by this. It's possible to both get on with your life and do a podcast, guys. But Will and Kate visited youth charity The Way Youth Zone in Wolverhampton. Will had tagged along to this. I think it was meant to just be a Kate's.
Was it another one? Oh my god.
But they met with the kids. Will played some football and Kate tried her hand at archery.
Oh my god, I love those pictures of Kate doing archery.
So funny.
I was also very into her outfit. She was wearing, can you believe it, a navy coat by Catherine Walker, a fucking new one. How many fucking navy coats does this woman own?
Way more than she needs to. But she paired it with a new blouse by Tory Burch, which was navy, with white polka dots and had white collar and cuffs with like a scallop design.
Yeah, they were nice. Her trousers haven't been identified, but they are probably the high-waisted jigsaw trousers that we've seen her wear a few times. And she had nice Emmy pumps on and her little Smithson purse. Oh, and new earrings.
Yeah, Freya Rose London mini gold hoops with detachable pearls.
Yeah, I really like this outfit. I like when she wears these more sort of modern outfits with trousers. I know I say this all the time, but when she wears a blouse and trousers, I'm like, wow, Kate looks very like a real person. She was also wearing what looked to be another fucking kid's mask from Amaya. God, the swearing is just off the charts now that I've been inspired by Prince Harry.
I just don't get why she wears children's masks.
Me neither. And I wonder, is it to make her look sort of more delicate? Or
But
to
surely
show...
it makes her face look bigger if she has a smaller mask. Because I saw other people saying, like, oh, it's to make her face look smaller, but that's the opposite. It looks like she's straining against the mask.
Goodness gracious.
I think she might have just picked up one of the kids' masks by accident.
No, she definitely does it on purpose because she wears them every single time. Apart from when she wears the disposable masks. She always has a kid's mask.
Yeah.
Oh, and apart from at the funeral. We liked that mask.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so perplexed by these kids' masks.
It just looks so painful. Well, first in line this week, we have to give it to our friends Ned, Rachel, Shai and Dom for being such excellent models for our new line of merch.
Our line of merch. Yes, thank you so much to our supermodel pals who helped us out by modelling our t-shirts.
And taking all the photos and stuff themselves as well. It was just, thank you. It was amazing.
If you haven't seen them yet, you can check them out on our Instagram at airheadspod, and you can find our merch on our website, airheads.co.uk. The t-shirts are like £25 and the mugs are like £10.
And they're really cool, and I'm going to get every single one of them.
Tom did a wonderful job on his designs.
Thanks, Maeve. And actually, Dom said she's been wearing hers all the time, and it's so comfy.
Yeah, we made sure we tested them all out and they felt really nice.
Yeah.
And they fit very nice. Anyway, that's enough of a plug. Next week, The Me You Can't See, Prince Harry and Oprah's docuseries arrives on Apple TV Plus from Friday, 21st of May. Also featuring Lady Gaga and Glenn Close.
Incredible.
Our respective favourites.
Yeah, for Oscar winners 2019.
And I have to say, I am a little bit trepidatious about this. I have a feeling it could be very boring.
Yes.
To me, personally. Not to my personal taste.
Yeah.
I can understand that a lot of people would be very interested in this, but I just have to say I'm going to try it. And I'm actually not going to keep going if I'm not loving it.
Yeah, the fact that it's a series is asking for quite a lot of attention from us.
Definitely got to watch the Lady Gaga one, though.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Prince Harry goes to Chromatica.
Well, because Lady Gaga took part in a Heads Together discussion with Prince William, where they did that sort of video call chat a few years ago. And I remember thinking, why couldn't Gaga do this with Kate or Harry? Why did she have to do it with Will? Does Will know any fucking Lady Gaga songs? Does he even appreciate what's happening right now?
Well, he loves Government Hooker. With that, we'll bid you all a very happy abolish the monarchy.
Thank you so much for listening and have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.
Who are you? I am the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions.
Then who am I?
You're the star.